Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Building a New Leadership Ladder, Transforming Male-Dominated Organizations to Support Women on the Rise, by Carol J. Geffner. Narrated by Jennifer Aquino. Preface. In 2002, I was flying home after a grueling 24-hour trip to attend a board meeting on the other side of the country. When I arrived at the airport with my colleagues from the C-suite, exhausted and ready for a relaxing trip home, the CEO let me know that there were only 8 rather than 9 seats remaining in first class. Without hesitating, he suggested I take the economy class ticket and, without discussion, boarded the plane with my peers, the 7 men with whom I shared the C-suite. I eventually boarded the plane with all the other passengers in the economy class. By then, my CEO and colleagues were comfortably tucked away in the first-class cabin. It's worth noting that at that time in the company's history, it was mandatory that executives fly first class. For the entire flight, I didn't hear a peep from my teammates. No glass of wine was ever sent back as a gesture of gratitude to thank me for giving up a first-class seat. No one even came back to say hello during a 6-hour flight. And when we were deplaning, no one waited to walk with me to pick up my bags before heading home. In some respects, this scenario is benign. There are certainly worse things than flying economy class. Nevertheless, given the circumstances, I lost out on 6 hours of informal networking with colleagues. In retrospect, I don't think the incident was intentional, but on the flight and for several weeks after the incident, I couldn't help but wonder if it had been meant to send a message to me about my status. To move on, I reminded myself that I had been hired into this C-suite position due to my deep expertise in learning, strategy, and large-scale change. The CEO was confident that my capabilities would be instrumental in helping transform the staid, privately held enterprise into a more agile and efficient contemporary organization. Yet even as I forged collegial and friendly relationships with every one of my colleagues, I was routinely reminded that I was different. This is why the plane incident was revelatory. It demonstrated a chasm that I would delicately navigate throughout my tenure at the organization. The work was fascinating, and if I could go back in time, I would still jump at the opportunity. Fortunately, I learned at a fairly young age that being a woman in a patriarchal setting was bound to pose unique challenges, and that these challenges sometimes included being literally or symbolically pushed to the margins. Over the course of my 30-year career in business and eventually in higher education, I have often found myself breaking new ground as a woman. Many of my roles have come with sacrifices. I have had to fit into organizational cultures I did not necessarily support, struggle to balance my career aspirations with family commitments, and often put my own personal needs, even my health, on the back burner. I know that I am not alone. Most women who end up in leadership positions make similar sacrifices. For some women, the rise to the top entails even greater challenges and sacrifices. Alongside gender, race and ethnicity continue to deeply shape who is viewed as a potential leader and who is subsequently groomed for such positions. However, to build organizations where the leadership truly reflects the diversity found among the rank and file, we need to do more than call on women and other minorities to lean in. This brings me to my reason for writing this book. Since I completed my bachelor's degree and entered the workforce in the late 1970s, I have witnessed myriad changes in the workplace. Women now occupy a wider range of positions across sectors. In some cases, these changes reflect lifted restrictions. In the early 1970s, for example, women could not even pursue leadership roles in the U.S. military or enter the academies where most future military leaders are trained. In other cases, the changes reflect the slow march of progress. In business, women now occupy more top leadership roles and are often not the sole female in the executive tier of the organizations where they work. Perhaps most importantly, what has changed is our awareness of the problem. We now appear to live in a world where everyone seems to be talking about gender, diversity, and leadership, and people are continuously trying to come up with solutions to the many persistent challenges in these areas. Unfortunately, over the course of my career, I have also seen how little organizations have changed. Yes, we now live in a world where you can easily pick up a best-selling book on women's leadership or watch a TED Talk on the subject. Yes, we now live in a world where younger women are more likely to be told they can do whatever they like when they grow up, and so arrive in the workforce convinced this is possible. But none of this means the rise to the top is necessarily much easier for women now than it was 50 years ago. Through my work as a strategy, leadership, and change consultant and executive coach, and as the director of the Executive Master of Leadership program at the University of Southern California, I have the privilege of interacting with hundreds of leaders across sectors each year. The stories I hear, both from women and from male allies, confirm that the leadership gap for women is an unrelenting structural problem that will not be overcome by simply leaning in or rising up. Women still struggle to be identified as potential leaders and are often penalized when they attempt to position themselves for future leadership roles. When women do succeed in obtaining an executive position, it is all too often because they have managed to do what is expected of them as women. That is, women's leadership success seems to rest on the ability to leverage traditionally feminine traits while not being permitted to exhibit too many traditionally masculine traits. This may explain why we have yet to see the rise of a female leader who has the confidence and stubbornness of a Mark Zuckerberg or an ego to match that of Elon Musk. This book is based on my years of experience working in business and as a consultant and on more than 200 hours of interviews with other women leaders across sectors. The first chapter offers a brief status update on the current state of leadership opportunities for women across sectors. Subsequent chapters investigate specific obstacles for women seeking leadership positions and explore why so many popular solutions not only fail, but also in some cases deepen the leadership gap for women. This book also explores practical solutions to help women level up in the workplace. To be clear, I am deeply supportive of calls for women to rise up, assert themselves, and dream big. As addressed in Chapter 2, women's self-efficacy remains a critical part of the solution. But for women and men to collectively change the number of women of diverse backgrounds who lead organizations and assume positions in the boardroom, women's individual efforts need to be bolstered by structural change at both an organizational and a societal level. To this end, building a new leadership ladder is not simply a call to action for women who want to lead, but also a call to action for organizations to begin to seriously rethink how and why they elevate certain potential leaders while overlooking others. As this book makes clear, for organizations to work for rather than against women, we need to dismantle and rebuild the structures, practices, and theories that have long guided how we think about and develop leaders. 1. A status update on women's leadership. This book was inspired and informed by my conversations with exceptional women leaders. Each of the women interviewed for this book is living proof that women can effectively lead, even in traditionally male-dominated fields. The fact that I had the ability to interview such a diverse range of women leaders also says a great deal about the era in which we are living. 40 years ago, I couldn't have carried out the research I did for this book because at the time, there would simply not have been enough women in top leadership roles to complete a significant number of qualitative interviews. But this doesn't mean that any field has yet achieved gender parity on the leadership front, nor does it mean that women leaders don't continue to find themselves working under exceptionally more difficult conditions than men in comparable positions. As I was writing this book over 2020 and 2021, several of the women leaders I interviewed saw their leadership careers suddenly and devastatingly derailed. The reasons for the derailments varied. One of my research participants, working in a male-dominated sector, was let go after a negative performance review, which was heavily influenced by the leadership of her employees' union. Another was subject to a series of false accusations designed to damage her brand. Ultimately, the situation forced her to turn down a high-profile promotion that would have put her on the national stage. Still, another participant, who had been elevated into a leadership role to help clean up an organization after a sexual harassment scandal, was given her walking papers because from the organization's perspective, she had been appointed to clean up a mess, but not to lead after the crisis. In a sense, These stories say it all. Women are increasingly moving into leadership roles across industries and sectors, but even when they arrive, their experience often remains remarkably different than that of their male colleagues. This chapter drills down on the numbers and unique conditions that have shaped women's progress on the leadership front since 2000 to explore why women continue to struggle to gain footing in the executive ranks. This chapter also explores several less obvious stories. It showcases the ones obscured by the numbers. Even as more women leaders make headlines, in no sector, not even those where women make up most of the workforce, do women come close to dominating top leadership positions. As discussed in the following sections, for this situation to change eventually, the grit and resilience of just a few exceptional women will not be enough. Broader and sustainable change will occur only through a structural upheaval. That is, even in the second decade of the 21st century, we are just getting started. The numbers. People like to say that there is power in numbers. This may be true, but sometimes change takes more than a critical mass. For example, although healthcare has historically been dominated by women, senior leadership positions are still male-dominated. Indeed, women make up 80% of the healthcare workforce, but occupy only approximately 20% of key leadership roles. The bottom line is that while there may be power in numbers, sometimes the most important factor is not how many women are present, but rather the specific roles they occupy in an organization. After all, change can happen from the bottom up, but systemic change rarely happens unless it is championed by leadership at the very top. A survey of sectors and industries reveals that this is where women's progress remains painfully slow. Women's leadership in publicly traded companies stands as a case in point. In 1970, there was only one woman leading a Fortune 500 company. In fact, by 1970, Katharine Graham had been president of the Washington Post since 1963. Her title would later change to Chief Executive Officer, CEO. It was not until 1974 that Graham was finally joined on the list by one other female CEO, Marian O. Sandler of Golden West Financial Corporation. For more than a decade, Graham and Sandler were the only women CEOs. In 1987, one other woman joined the list, Linda Wachner of Warnaco Group Incorporated. But when Graham retired in 1992, women again occupied only 2 top leadership positions on the Fortune 500 list. This started to change in 2000, when the number of women leading Fortune 500 companies, which by then included both industrial and non-industrial companies, started to slowly climb. 4 women CEOs appeared on the Fortune 500 list in 2000. Over the next 2 years, 2 more women leaders were added. By 2010, women's representation had jumped to 15, with many more women leading Fortune 1000 companies. And between 2000 and 2020, the number of women leading Fortune 500 companies more than doubled. By 2021, 41 women were listed as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Although 41 out of 500 is still a small fraction, after years of stagnant growth, something had clearly shifted. But what? A change in attitude about women's leadership may partially account for the increase in the number of women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies since 2000. A more likely explanation is that over the past 2 decades, some publicly traded companies have finally decided to correct a long-standing catch-22 for potential women executives. For a public company to promote a male or female leader to a CEO position, qualified individuals are typically identified by executive search firms and sometimes by members of the board of directors. Qualified candidates were historically those who had already broken through the glass ceiling into a CEO role or executive-level position with profit and loss responsibilities. For women, being so identified has long posed a problem since the pool of qualified female candidates was small at best. In the 2000s, a growing number of companies, including those on the Fortune 500 list, started to relax the prior CEO requirements and to consider a broader suite of accomplishments, including prior private company board service and executive positions. A Harvard Business Review article by Catherine H. Tinsley and Kate Permel suggests that this decision had a profound impact. As Tinsley and Permel found in comparing the career paths of 100 women CEOs of public companies to a comparable male cohort, notably their samples were drawn from the largest 3,000 publicly traded companies in the United States. Prior to becoming a public company CEO, women were significantly more likely to serve on a corporate board than men, and, for those recruited from the outside, women were almost twice as likely to be promoted from a non-CEO title as men. In other words, changing, but by no means lowering the requirements was needed for women to be considered eligible to lead a publicly traded company and offer them an alternative pathway to the C-suite. Although women's progress on the leadership front has been scaling up in companies of varying size, many other sectors have witnessed uneven progress. Take, for example, the military. Unlike the corporate sector, where women have often struggled but have not been banned from holding leadership roles, until 1967, women in the United States could not attain the rank of general or flag officer. In 1970, this changed when Anna Mae Hayes and Elizabeth Pascal Hoisington became the Army's first female brigadier generals, but their breakthrough would not immediately open the gates for women. More than 40 years later, only 69 of 976 generals and flag officers serving in the U.S. military were women. Between 2010 and 2020, the number of women holding general and flag officer positions increased only slightly. As of 2020, women occupied anywhere from 8% of officer roles in the Marine Corps to 23% of officer roles in the Coast Guard. Research suggests that prevailing perceptions about women's leadership potential and previous experience requirements, for example, an expectation that officers have previous experience serving as an aide, remain ongoing obstacles to women's advancement in the military. Compared to the military, law enforcement has proven even more resistant to change. As of 2016, just 3% of police chiefs were women, and since 2016, these numbers have not risen. Indeed, between 2016 and 2020, many women police chiefs have been forced out or voluntarily left their leadership positions. In many respects, this trend is far from surprising. A study on gender by the National Institute of Justice reported in 2019 that a majority of women in policing consider their profession to be toxic, and many still do not feel valued by peers on the job. Worse yet, solving the gender disparity in law enforcement, especially at the top ranks, faces ongoing challenges. As the author of the study observed, there is limited empirical research on how to increase the number of women in policing, improve the recruitment of outstanding women, and increase the retention and promotion of exceptional women officers. Whereas women occupy only 3% of police chief positions, the numbers seemingly tell a different story in the world of higher education, where they occupy roughly 1/3, or 33%, of all executive positions. Moreover, as reported in the Times Higher Education Supplement in early 2020, 39, or 19%, of the world's top 200 universities now have a female leader. The growing presence of women leading colleges and universities is not entirely surprising, since they have long made up at least half of the higher education workforce. Yet, as previously noted, a higher proportion of women workers doesn't necessarily translate into a higher proportion of women leaders. As a case in point, we haven't seen the same progress in healthcare, where women have also long made up a majority of the workforce. What do these numbers tell us about the current landscape for women leaders? Research suggests that as more women assume executive-level positions, the likelihood is greater that other women will aspire to assume these roles moving forward. Behind the good news, however, problems persist, sometimes even where women appear to be making significant gains. Gendered leadership funnels. Imagine being the first woman on the board of a major corporation. You will become a beacon for women waiting in the wings, assuring them through your presence that the door is open. However, the tacit understanding among those already occupying the rest of the seats may be that, as the first woman in the boardroom, you should be humbled to occupy a seat at the table. Your experience suggests that as the new kid, you should listen acutely, speak but not assume you will have a voice, and recognize you might not be viewed as an equal colleague. This account may seem hyperbolic, but it is echoed by countless women and supported by my own research. Moreover, board seats are not the only positions where women often discover they are subject to different expectations than their male counterparts. In 2019, Korn Ferry, a global executive search and organizational consulting firm, conducted a study on the number of women who hold C-suite positions based on data from the 1,000 largest corporations in the United States. It is encouraging that 25% of the top 5 critical C-suite positions, CEO, Chief Financial Officer, CFO, Chief Information Officer, CIO, Chief Marketing Officer, CMO, and Chief Human Resources Offices, CHRO, are now occupied by women. Examining the data with a microscopic lens reveals a slightly different story, however. Only 6% of CEOs and 12.5% of CFOs are women, whereas 55% of CHROs are women. As already discussed, the lower number of women CEOs still reflects the fact that there are a limited number of women in the leadership pipeline. By contrast, this explanation does not account for the exceptionally low number of women CFOs. As of 2018, 61% of accountants and auditors, 53% of financial managers, and 37% of financial analysts were women, which suggests women are present but systematically screened out of the leadership pipeline. The question is, why do women continue to be funneled into some, but not all, types of leadership positions? According to Korn Ferry's study, the dominance of women in certain roles, especially people-focused roles such as CHRO positions, may have a simple explanation. As their study concluded, women bring several competencies to the table, including collaboration, agility, empathy, and an ability to coach and influence that are critical to successfully optimizing the leadership of an organization. This is a positive representation of women and their leadership potential, but it also takes for granted the assumption that women and men are essentially different. Whether one attributes these essential differences to biology, that is, women are hardwired to be more empathetic and better communicators, or socialization, that is, women are trained from an early age to be more empathetic and better communicators, is of little consequence. In either case, the message is the same. Women are predisposed for certain types of roles, specifically those that require exceptional communication and people skills, even when it comes to leadership. On the flip side, the same binary and biologically based thinking can also be used to conclude that women are less suited to other roles, for example, CEO or CFO positions, that are often equated with stereotypical male traits, for example, logic and decisiveness. Beyond the troubling assumption that women may simply be better cut out for some leadership roles than others, there is also growing evidence that not all leadership roles are equally valued. As William Scarborough reported in the Harvard Business Review in 2018, female managers are concentrated in fields that emphasize people-centered caring skills, and the occupations where female managers are concentrated are also those with the largest gender wage gaps. Notably, the wage gap is not minor. CHROs are routinely the lowest compensated member of the C-suite, often making less than half of what CEOs and CFOs earn. CHROs also may or may not benefit from annual bonuses. The question is, are CHRO positions underpaid because women tend to occupy these roles, or do women end up being funneled into CHRO roles because they are underpaid positions, or because men avoid pursuing these positions due to their undercompensation? It seems likely that in this case, a combination of factors may be at play. There are also signs that undoing the pay gap within the C-suite may be easier said than done. As Scarborough observes, gender, as a system of stratification, has a sneaky way of reproducing itself. As women enter management, gender seems to operate as an organizing logic so that women end up in caring-centered occupations and men in occupations that focus on the production of goods. Breaking down the gendered corporate funnel will ultimately rest on moving beyond a biology is destiny mindset, but this is likely to be an uphill battle for several reasons. Masculinity is still readily upheld as a leadership trait across sectors for one simple reason. When people think about leaders, they tend to imagine a man, and he is usually a white man. In some cases, however, femininity is also promoted as a potential leadership attribute. Researchers have found that at least in some cases, women leaders can successfully influence male-dominated organizational cultures by leveraging traits traditionally viewed as feminine, or what they refer to as strategic femininity. In a study of women leaders on Wall Street, for example, Melissa Fisher found that many successful women strategically utilized nurturing practices and language considered typically feminine. Although such findings are not necessarily negative, they underscore just how deeply ingrained gender-based assumptions and norms continue to be. The problem then appears to be threefold. First, despite recent gains, men still outnumber women across the C-suite. Second, a disproportionate number of women who do gain C-suite roles end up occupying just a few positions, primarily CHRO positions, and these positions tend to be severely undercompensated when compared to other C-suite positions. Moreover, in nearly all cases, these positions are also not ones that will ever lead to CEO roles. That is, CHRO experience is rarely, if ever, viewed as a stepping stone to more lucrative C-suite positions. Finally, beyond the gendered corporate funnel, both men and women, even women in leadership positions, often continue to reinforce and normalize traditional gender-based behaviors and traits. This, however, may not be the only reason women appear to be funneled, often early in their careers, either out of the leadership pipeline or into a pipeline that can lead only to less well-compensated leadership positions. On this account, it is useful to turn to higher education, the only sector where women now occupy more than a third of leadership roles. From the outside, women's relative success in obtaining leadership positions in higher education suggests that in this sector, they are not subject to the same gender-based funneling effect found in the private sector. A deeper dive into the data, however, reveals that even in sectors where women appear to be increasingly obtaining executive leadership positions, the leadership pipeline may still be structured by certain gender-based practices and may be especially vulnerable to labor market changes. Indeed, a disproportionate number of the 30% of women who lead higher education institutions do not run doctoral granting institutions, but rather four-year colleges or community colleges. Unfortunately, with few exceptions, senior leadership roles at the college level carry less prestige and lower compensation packages than similar roles at PhD granting institutions. There are also troubling indications that despite recent advancements, the future of women leaders in higher education may not be guaranteed. A study by the Brookings Institution in 2019 found that the number of tenured women professors has been in decline since the early 2000s. Because most leadership positions in higher education require a prior role as a tenured professor, future leadership growth for women certainly cannot be taken for granted. Rise of the celebrity woman leader. Over the past decade, names such as Angela Merkel, Nancy Pelosi, Melinda Gates, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, Mary Barra, Sheryl Sandberg, and Kamala Harris have come to occupy a short list of celebrity leaders around the globe. On the surface, the rise of these luminaries is encouraging. According to one study published in 2019, women role models can offer an inspiration to other women about what is possible and how to show up in tough male-dominated business situations. But the elevated focus on this rarefied group of superstar celebrities does not seem to empower other women or lead to an increase in their representation at the executive level. Here, Sheryl Sandberg's thoughts on women's leadership stand as a useful case study. In 2012, Sandberg was named one of the top 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. At the time, she was only 43 and had just been appointed the 8th member and first woman member of Facebook's board of directors. Since her Facebook appointment, Sandberg's influence and celebrity have continued to rise not only due to her corporate position, but also thanks to her thought leadership on women's leadership.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?